At 7 p.m., the ballroom of the Sterling estate was a cathedral of manufactured perfection. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain, casting a jagged, artificial light over 300 guests who traded in the currency of who knows who. My father, Arthur, stood at the center of it all, his chest puffed out under a tuxedo that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. It was his 60th birthday, a milestone he was treating like a coronation, but to me, the opulence felt thin. It smelled of desperation and expensive floor wax. I watched his hands as he adjusted his cufflinks, the same telltale tremor I'd seen 1,000 times. It was the vibration of a man standing on a fault line, trying to convince the crowd he was the mountain. "You're late, Elena," my mother's voice sliced through the air before she even reached me. She didn't hug me, she appraised me. Her eyes, sharpened by decades of social warfare, scanned my charcoal wool dress. "You look functional." On a night like this, functional is just another word for invisible. She adjusted her vintage Bulgari necklace, a piece I knew was currently being used as collateral for a high-interest bridge loan. In this house, wealth didn't whisper. It screamed to drown out the sound of the debt collectors. "A woman of 30 needs a foundation, Elena. You look untethered." My father's voice was a practiced baritone of paternal concern, but his eyes were darting toward the entrance, checking for the arrival of the elite who had already begun to snub his calls. I took a slow sip of room-temperature sparkling water, watching the frantic pulse in his neck that I didn't defend my firm. I didn't mention that my untethered life currently managed the energy grids of half the eastern seaboard. Instead, I recognized the maneuver for what it was: projective identification. They weren't diagnosing my life, they were narrating their own demise. When Dad called me unstable, he was really talking about the margin calls on his offshore accounts. Then came my brother, Julian, swirling a cognac he couldn't afford. "It's honestly embarrassing, Elle. You're a ghost. While we're out here maintaining the Sterling legacy, you're playing at business." The legacy he spoke of was a hollowed-out shell of shell companies and pending litigation. He needed me to be the ghost so he could pretend he wasn't already a corpse. Mom sighed, a sound of choreographed pity. "You're so isolated, darling. No roots. Just cold numbers." She said this while standing 3 feet away from a husband who hadn't looked her in the eye since 2012. They were the ones bleeding out, yet they were trying to convince me I was the one with the wound. The music died a choreographed death as my mother stepped onto the dais, her champagne flute raised like a scepter. The room went silent, the kind of silence that precedes an execution. "Tonight is about legacy," she began, her voice projecting a brittle, porcelain strength. "But a legacy is only as strong as its weakest link. Elena has chosen a path of isolation and mediocrity. She has turned her back on the Sterling name." She looked directly at me, her eyes gleaming with a predatory desperation. "As of this moment, Elena is dead to this family. She is stripped of her inheritance, her title, and her access. We are cutting the dead weight to save the ship." That I didn't flinch. I didn't scream about the unfairness of it all. I simply applied the gray rock method. I became a blank slate, a smooth, impenetrable surface that offered her no emotional purchase. "I see," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "That is an interesting perspective." The lack of friction hit her harder than a slap. She wanted a scene, she needed my tears to validate her power. Instead, the only sound that followed was the soft, electronic beep-beep from the bar. The head caterer was staring at the card reader, his face a mask of professional discomfort. The ship wasn't being saved, it was already underwater. "Pay the bill, Elena," Dad hissed, the crimson blotches on his neck clashing with his silk tie. "Consider it a final gift for the decades we carried your ghost." The audacity was a masterclass in narcissism. He had just declared me dead to the family, yet now he was asking the corpse to cover the catering that I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a synchronized thud. Elias walked in. He didn't look like a bodyguard, he looked like a sovereign nation. His presence was a vacuum that sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. He bypassed the socialites and the confused caterers, stopping exactly 2 inches from my chair. "Ms. Sterling," he said, His voice was a low, resonant frequency that made the crystal glasses hum. The board has ratified the takeover. The locks on the city offices have been cycled, and the pilot is standing by. Dad let out a jagged, panicked laugh. Who is this? Some actor you hired to play pretend? He's my chief of security, Dad, I said, standing up. And he isn't here for the cake. He's here because the holding company I control just foreclosed on this estate. You aren't hosting a party, you're trespassing in my foyer. We are your parents. Mom shrieked, the sound cracking like cheap glass. It was the final, desperate play in the narcissist's handbook, an appeal to a biological contract they had long ago shredded. No, I said, my voice clinical and quiet. You are my tenants, and your lease on this reality has expired. I looked at Elias and gave a slight nod. Please escort them out. And Elias? Ensure they take the service elevator. The main lift is reserved for members in good standing. The site was a study in ontological collapse. My brother was a ghost of himself, staring at a phone that was currently being disconnected. My father tried to maintain his king of the jungle posture, but his bespoke suit looked like a costume on a shrinking man. They were marched past the gold-leafed cake and the silent guests, disappearing into the narrow, stainless steel hallway meant for the help they had spent a lifetime demeaning. That I walked to the balcony. The city was a grid of light, and for the first time in 32 years, the air didn't taste like debt or disappointment. It tasted like cold, clean oxygen. Legacies aren't inherited, they are built when you stop asking for permission from people who only love your reflection. If you've ever had to build your own table, let them watch you eat.